Let's bring in for more analysis of the situation. And just to bring you up to date, if you're just joining us, we've been hearing from the US ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, and from the French ambassador to the UN, Francois Delattre, both pointing the finger of blame at Russia, Iran and Bashar al-Assad, Syria, for the chemical weapons attack in Douma. Joining us for more analysis, OMAR IMADY, who's Senior Fellow at the Centre for Syrian Studies at St Andrews University in Scotland. OMAR, thank you very much for being with us. I don't think there's ever been a more finely balanced moment in Syria's history, has there?
Yes, well, everything does seem to be converging in quite a sudden way, an unexpected manner. Just a few days after the U.S. was speaking about, pulling out of Syria, now here we are. So yes, a very sudden, dramatic change indeed.
How do you see this situation playing out, given we have a very categoric wording from the US via Nikki Haley about what the United States may do next?
Right. Well, I think there's two types of reactions. We often are consumed with one, which is what we might call a disciplinary reaction. In other words, the United States, launches an attack or strikes that are meant to, in a sense, punish the regime. But these regimes don't respond well to these disciplinary measures, so to speak, and they tend to make a point at proven and that repeatedly that they will do the very thing they were punished for, so to speak. Then there are other reactions which aim at eliminating the capacity of such regimes to carry out such acts, period. I don't think, so far at least, no one is speaking of the latter. Mostly we're talking about a limited, strike, possibly similar, possibly a bit more significant than the one we saw last year in April. We will have to wait and see. But unfortunately, again, whether this is disciplinary or not, what we need to keep in mind is that Syrian civilians, innocent Syrian civilians, are being killed through chemical weapons, through other, through bombings, through barrel bombs, and this continues. It continues as we speak. It has been taking place. It might, move to the north tomorrow, to the south in a month from now. We should not be overly consumed with the events of the last few days, horrific as they are, but keep the general picture in mind. We have a tragedy taking place, and there are no one is really speaking about a way to stop it, to bring it to a halt.
Indeed, the reaction to the attack on Khan Sheikhoun a year ago, Tomahawk missiles fired at Syria, it didn't stop what happened happening this weekend. I get your point completely. We heard the Russian ambassador to the UN talking about the Syrian white helmets, basically discrediting them, saying that what they're doing is misleading and, in fact, propaganda. What would you say to that?
Well, you see, the way in which these acts are taking place, by their very nature, they're extremely difficult to prove in the way in which Russia and others demand proof, because they take place under very difficult circumstances, largely encircled, under siege. How is one to come up with a smoking gun, so to speak? But what one does come up with is the most likely scenario under such circumstances, and even equally important, one understands that even if one suspends the idea of whether or not chemical weapons were used or not, no one is disputing the fact that barrel bombs are constantly being thrown over civilian areas, very indiscriminate bombs. The Russians are not refuting that, nor is the Syrian regime. So in either way, these crimes against civilians are taking place, and the idea of discrediting this body or the other is propaganda, unfortunately.
Propaganda completely, and obviously both Haley and Delattre talking about war crimes, crimes against humanity being committed, and as you pointed out, the dropping of these barrel bombs, indiscriminate attempts to kill, and successful attempts to kill civilians.
Yes, yes, yes. And you know, to add to all of this, you know, as you witness in the Security Council meeting, and there's clearly we're not witnessing an attempt to come up with a unified attempt to end this. So that's not taking place on a diplomatic level. And when we talk about military measures, my fear is that they're mostly of the type that aim at, again, punishing the regime, but not stopping it. So we're not stopping it diplomatically, and we're not using force to stop it. So the tragedy will continue, unfortunately, regardless. And that's where the real story is. The story of these Syrians who are living under these tragic situations.
Hear what you're saying, and the Security Council, of course, whenever anything is moved to stop it, the Russians will use their veto and obviously go in favour of Bashar al-Assad.
Right, yes, and there, clearly both sides have not arrived at a language that they can both mutually, understand and relate to end this. So, diplomatically, this is not taking place. And then when we hear about measures, so we've seen this last year, and maybe something a bit more significant this time, maybe not. But either way, the tragedy continues. And I think that this is, in the midst of all of this, this is the thing to keep in mind, to capture, is that the tragedy of the Syrian people is continuing regardless.
Omar IMADY of St Andrews there at the Centre for Syrian Studies. Thank you, sir, for your analysis. Thank you for your time. We appreciate your time here on France 24.